Jai Hind, Jai Bharat, and welcome to Dev Talks. This is Aadi. They say that the world is going through a global great reset. Of course, the great reset also comes down from the World Economic Forum and the whole lot of conspiracy that flows in from there. But let's understand the world is going through a reset. What is our plan? What is our country going to do? How does the economics, the geoeconomics of the world link up with the geopolitics, and how does the world go forward? Let's have an all rounded discussion with my guest here today, Mr. Saurav Jha. He's back again, and I'm proud to actually have him on the show. As a matter of fact, he's going to show you a book. I've read this book personally vouch for it. Get that. It is a beautiful book if you want to understand the back ends. Good afternoon, sir, and welcome to the show.
Good afternoon, Aadi. Glad to be back here, and it's always a pleasure to have these long discussions with you. Although I believe we are also going to take questions from the
Yes,
viewers today,
yes, we are.
so that's going to be quite nice because that's a format I'm quite used to actually with the programs that I sometimes do on the DDR channel. So you mentioned my book, so I shall hold it up once again. Right. I spent, as I was telling you, I spent the greater part of a decade researching this book called "Negotiating the New Normal: How India Must Grow in a Pandemic-Ridden World." And even if I may say so myself, things in China and India on the policy front, and indeed in the way the economy is sort of evolving, is pretty much in keeping with what I have outlined in this book. The global reset that you talked about, this book anticipated that global reset before we started hearing about it in the media. But the thing is that there are these inner, there are these essentially there are these currents, there are these undercurrents really in the world, or actually not undercurrents only, or rather, or yeah, undercurrents, which are what should I say? They will inevitably take the world in a certain direction for the near future, right? The drift will happen in a particular direction, and the drift may happen at an accelerating pace as you go along.
Most, most importantly.
So because in some many cases the threshold has already been crossed, right? In fact, one of the signposts for that sort of accelerating drift path that we are talking about was the recent G20 summit. This G20 summit was not so much about, as I think I've tweeted about it also, was not so much about whether the world's major economies can come together again on a single plank to fight a common problem, which was very much there post the global financial crisis, right? And a lot of deals were made basically through the G20 format. But this time over, the situation is a little different in the sense that obviously the responses that have happened now, as I've outlined in earlier talks on your channel and everything, ultimately follow from all that was learned in the wake of the global financial crisis. But this time, the break between the United States and China is very real because their
Hmm.
interests do not coincide anymore. It's as simple as that, right? Their interests do not coincide anymore in the way they did even subsequent to the GFC. Post the GFC, the West was looking at a world where the world would accept the cheapening of the dollar that they undertook via their quantitative easing programs, etc. They wanted the rest of the world to accept that. They wanted the central banks of their main, sort of suppliers, exporters, if you will, to accept the sort of spillovers that would happen when they would engage in large scale asset purchase programs, also known as quantitative easing, and sometimes, colloquially referred to as printing money, basically. But as I have said earlier, it's not really printing money. It's not quite as simple as that, right? Because they essentially they increase the commercial bank reserves, which are a liability of the central bank. They do it via a very simple process, but it's not really printing money because all that money sits on the asset side of the commercial banks. It doesn't leak into the real economy just like that, especially when conditions are depressed.
Most importantly, yeah.
Anyway, so I won't go into that. That I've covered that in earlier programs, and that would be a different discussion. But the
Hmm.
main thing is that, so post GFC, the West wanted something from China, and China wanted something from the
Something
West,
from the West. Hmm.
which was basically technology, right? So you would see between 2008 and 2015, before Germany and America under Obama woke up to the kind of acquisitions China had done on the tech front. I'm talking in terms of tech companies, key tech companies in the United States and in Europe. A lot of things had already been moved to China. It is not surprising that China's aerospace sector has really taken off in the last decade or so. They got a while these were not covered that much by the mainstream media in the mid 2010s, but they acquired a lot of key companies which were involved in the material side of things. China did not have much capability in composites in the 90s, by the way, right, in the area of composites, but today they do. There are many other areas I can talk about. For instance, single crystal blade technology for high pressure turbine blades that go into modern, jet engines, low bypass turbofans, etc. They did not have the capability for making the thermal barrier coatings necessary to be for for insulation purposes on those blades. To give them more temperature resistant capability, etc., and all that. Nor did they actually have the investment casting processes in place for casting those blades. Those blades have to
Hmm.
be cast. They cannot be forged or anything. They're small and they're very intricate. All this stuff, there are British entities which help them, by the way. And
Gosh.
I am personally privy to this matter because I'm involved in something where these same entities are now engaging us here in India. I'm talking about the British entities, right? So you can get what I'm trying to say. So
The
this is
reset.
the sort of a lot of this went on. It was only in 2015-16 that the environment started to change, and Obama and Merkel and all, they started talking about how we need to block. Then certain acquisitions by Chinese companies started getting vetoed, right? So that was the beginning. And then you had Trump come in, and then he started his war on Huawei and to an extent ZTE. Now, a lot of people are saying, oh, but Huawei has managed to come up with a chip, 7 nanometer chip, which is useful for 5G smartphones, etc. No technology. But that is not actually I know there are some people, even in the Indian media, who are holding this up as an example, as an exemplar of how technology denial versus China will not work. But that's wrong. It is working, and Huawei will become a victim of its own publicized success, because now the restrictions are going to be made even tighter.
Even
And see, there is China, although they are not announcing this, but China has two exascale supercomputers already, by the way. They have two exascale supercomputers. But what is the catch? The catch is those computers have been built with older generation chips, right? So they consume a lot more power. They're exascale. Their R peak is in the exascale range. It's in exaflop territory. You know, but the point is that they have been built with older generation chips. Similarly, it's not a question of China bringing out a chip which is now compatible with the Huawei phone. Fact is, the Americans have already screwed Huawei enough for them not to have cracked the global market. All that China, in the way they wanted to, they cracked it in terms of base stations and all that. We know that, right? A lot of the 5G network equipment came from China only. But
correct.
but they were planning to capitalize on that and basically capture entire networks with phones, with their own phones as well. But it's not happening. And those are going to be ripped and replaced very soon, by the way. Many of the base stations that were bought from Huawei and all.
Mm.
And a lot of that will be supplied from India as well. And this is something that I am already saying. People will think, but is it in the offing? It is in the offing. You will hear more about it in the next 2-3 years, obviously. The bottom line is this: America cannot trust China's networks. America cannot allow China to gain the scale and define standards. Right? because that is where industrial greatness lies, in being able to define the standards in any industry.
Correct.
This is one of the ways in which Japan has gone, has got by over the last 30 years, because they define the standards in certain key industries as well. America will not allow made in China standards 2035 to succeed, and it has already put a major spoke in the wheels of made in China 2025. There was a point when Huawei was going to dominate the world scene, and Trump's restrictions, which were heightened by Biden, made sure it didn't happen. Huawei was set back by 3 years, and that was enough for the rest of the world to buy time.
And
So
that's what
what
has happened.
Huawei so what Huawei can now do is continue to dominate the Chinese market and dominate it even more. This is a point I go into in my book, that the national champions of China will increasingly dominate their own market at the expense of smaller players in China. So you will see consolidation happening. And because Samsung et al. Will vacate production in China, those guys, Huawei will gain even more scale in China by acquiring old Samsung facilities if required, or getting it acquired by a proxy, which seems like another company, but it's actually Huawei only. Get what I'm saying?
So, if I may, sorry to interject, but is that
Yeah.
the reason why they've banned Apple phones?
Yeah, they've
Give the
understood that
market
the
share.
global
Ah,
market, they will face non-tariff barriers in the global market everywhere. So to
fantastic.
survive, they have to now basically cannibalize their own market as much as they can. China is going to become more and more insular. It's not going to, its going out strategy has failed. The Belt and Road Initiative is the single largest collection of failed projects in the world today.
Absolutely.
And that is entirely because of its own design, because of its innate design itself. The way it tried to grow, the way it invested, the way it neglected looking at, the connect. See, Belt and Road Initiative, and of which, CPEC is the flagship, would have worked in South Asia only if India had been onboarded. None
That's
of
what their
the
website also
BRI
says.
projects can work without market connections to India. So they are failing. It's not surprising that they are failing. Whereas what India has come up with, or okay, all right, the United States and Saudi Arabia have also come up with it. This is something which is already in place, right? I'm talking about IMEC, obviously, the corridor to Europe via the Arabian Peninsula. This is something that is already in place in terms of the sea navigation and the sea routes, right? And the ports. Mundra port is developed, Fujairah port is developed, Haifa port is developed, and Adani has got in there earlier anyway, right? And you have the PDS port, which, by the way, the Costco helped develop in Greece. The Chinese have developed, and now India is going to be a beneficiary of something that China was basically, looking at. And then, of course, you have Marseille in France, and you have the ports in Italy. But the point is that this corridor is already in place. It needs to be energized with a new, except for, of course, the a certain
Railway,
rail line. Yeah, yeah,
which is
rail
also
line will
given
have
to
to be
us,
built.
which is
A
also
rail
we are
line,
doing it.
yeah, yeah. But and Rights and Ircon will probably implement that rail line. Okay, the
Yeah,
rail
it's
line
happened
to.
already. Yesterday, the orders have come.
Oh, so there you have it. So you are implementing the rail line, and the rail line is, of course, you are only talking about 850 kilometers. A lot of
Hardly.
the rail line is also in place, so it's not
That's
like a.
basically the connect between Dubai and Riyadh, I think.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
If you remember, Rights and Ircon had done fabulous work building railways in Iraq, right, in the
Absolutely.
80s. So 70s and 80s. So, they have a lot of experience over there. Only question is getting the customs architecture right. Okay. Will you charge customs? The basic customs duty, not all the other things that are there, not count, those are out of the picture anyway. The customs has to be got right, the customs architecture, both in terms of actual tariffs levied, customs duty levied, as well as time taken at customs due to procedures. So procedures will have to be made much easier as well, and
Correct.
this would work, and it would attract other investments as well. The other sort of second order investments they're talking about in terms of green energy, supply chain management, etc., logistics. You're going to look at several warehouses, etc., etc. So this is a much better designed, sort of corridor, if you like. and most of its elements are already in place.
In place.
Whereas in the case of the Chinese, they have tried to design something that suits only them, but depends on its success for buy-in from others and others who are not well disposed towards them. Yeah, this something like this was deemed to failure. Was destined for failure anyway. It's not going to work. And you
Yeah.
see, the worst part was our the BR the last ditch attempt to save BRI was also destroyed by India. I'm sure you can guess what I'm talking about. Think about 2019, late 2019. What happened in late 2019, if you remember?
Just a month before the month that we are sitting in, as a matter of fact, when we destroyed their
So,
entire plan.
what happened was they tried very hard. Okay,
Yeah.
they tried very hard, and their inability to get a de facto free trade agreement with us
Ours,
through
through ourselves.
the through RCEP, their inability to get a de facto free trade agreement with us through RCEP meant that BRI failed in the Southeast Asian corridor also. We ensured that the maritime Silk Route also failed via
Yeah.
that. See, the one road, one belt and road initiative, right? So the Silk Road economic belt in any case was a long shot. And but I have talked to many historians over the world. There was no one silk route. Okay, a lot of disparate routes are retrospectively talked about as the silk route, right? So the thing is that the Silk Route economic belt was deemed to failure was going to fail anyway. They were banking on the maritime Silk Route, and we by ensuring that we did not and by pulling out of RCEP, we put paid to that. So obviously, then they decided that the timetable for trying to gain an advantage on the border had to be brought up, and
Had to be brought up.
you had 100 discussions on that with several people from the military. So we'll not go into that.
Hmm.
So there you. But by the way, that has its own underpinnings. The day they
Yeah.
came into Tibet, we ended up with an unstable border. But we won't go into that. That's been covered
That's a
elsewhere.
history. Yeah.
Yeah, but they
Let's
would
let's
have to.
let's. So,
If we had onboarded, if we had joined RCEP, the timetable would have been pushed further back by them. It would have
but
been much later.
the
Ah,
clash would have still happened.
clash would have happened for sure, but they would have tried their best to not let it happen. Now what has happened is now they have no option. They have had to show their hand anyway,
Yeah.
which for years I have been saying is their only hand. I used to go and give talks at one of the MEA's main institutes, and I had mentioned this in 2017 that we are not going to be the China is not going to respect BDCAs in any way going forward. You know, I had mentioned this over there. So anyway, so that's another story.
Let's get
The
into, if you don't mind, I want to talk about BRICS also, because that, what I've noticed is that a lot of the Western commentators who are pro Russia have been touting about, and if you look at the American unofficial press, which is YouTube and stuff like that, a lot of these commentators actually mention about the new world order being created by the common currency in BRICS. Now, till about 2 months ago in BRICS, even in India, the narrative was, oh, bus, now the common currency will come, gold based, tuck, 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 and it'll be done. And I kept saying, yeah, there's no study happening. What are you talking about? I mean, there has to be public opinion, studies, whole lot of things that needs to happen. One, I want to talk about that, and two, the geopolitics of BRICS, because the BRICS to me, post the advent of this G20, seems to be completely sidelined. With Xi Jinping's own actions, Russia is an easy guy to be brought back in. That should not be much of a challenge. But Xi Jinping's own actions, BRICS as a structure will remain relevant as a positioning platform, but not beyond that. That's my perspective. I'd like to know yours.
See, Adi, to be fair, BRICS is not just a mere talk shop. Okay,
It's not. Yeah.
it has built two key institutions. which you know, the New Development Bank and the CRA, right? The Contingency Reserve Arrangement.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
those are useful, because what happened was to ensure that the spillovers of cranky Western monetary policy, which is not cranky, which is very well designed, as I've
Actually,
outlined in my book. It's very clever. Okay, it takes full advantage of their incumbency, their incumbent stature in the world financial stage,
so you're
to
breaking a lot of
to
bubbles.
hedge against those spillovers, to mitigate the effects of those spillovers. India and other countries in the world, the global south, and also not just the global south, Japan as well, engaged in a lot of these swap agreements and common pool agreements where they could call dollar liquidity if and as and when required. So BRICS was that is definitely one of the pillars of BRICS to sort of mitigate the effects of global spillovers emanating from the policies of the main central bank of the world called the Federal Reserve, right, of the United States of America. The second idea was very simple, that multilateral lending is not happening in the way that developing countries need, and the need for the and developing countries need trillions in infrastructure. So building another multilateral development bank made a lot of sense, which is what the
Hmm.
NDB is. And you would have common shares there instead of having the problems that you face in the IMF and World Bank, where somebody has a veto. America still has that effective veto,
Yeah,
okay, although almost diluted now, right? Because it's still around that. After the next round of rearrangements, maybe it will not. Maybe
it'll
that
be
will
done.
fall
Hmm.
around closer to that mark where it can't really be called a veto anymore. But anyway, and the other was also to put up a common front to reshape the IMF and the World Bank. That was definitely part and parcel of what the BRICS wanted to do.
The reform, yes, sir.
So in the whole, because at that time the whole negotiations for the new arrangements to borrow at the IMF was happening,
Hmm.
and the 15th review was underway and all that, right? Quota review for quota reforms and
Yeah,
things
yeah,
like that.
yeah, yeah.
So the thing is that there's another review for quota reforms underway, and India and China would both expect their own shares to be increased again, right? The shares in the IMF. But the point remains that ultimately India also joined the BRICS not just to put pressure on the West for getting what it wants, but also to shape things from within. Because the current Indian strategy is that we will not be blindsided by anything.
Anything.
And
Hmm.
this is a strategy I have also advocated. I'll give again as an aside, I would say I was a major advocate of an ASAT test, an actual ASAT demonstration, anti-satellite demonstration, because I have long known that a new space NPT was being negotiated. And had we not done Mission Shakti in 2019, we
19.
would have again faced a 1968 cutoff kind of problem. Okay, that happened with the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. But now India has a major seat at that table, that space NPT table. India is a pretty much a discussant on what shape it will take, what are going to be the contours of that treaty, if it ever comes to be, because now
If it
people
does.
are, because weaponization of space is a reality, again another reality. So India wants to shape things from within, which is why it is solidly there in the G20. It is solidly there in BRICS. It is solidly there in SCO.
Everywhere.
NATO is an imperial construct. India will never join NATO.
Never.
Okay,
Hmm.
and will not agree to any MNNA status either from NATO. India will not agree to that. That goes against India's philosophy altogether. But if, say, 5 years or 4 years down the line, they want to create a new G8 with India in it, right? Instead of, they'll drop Russia and put India in it. I have a feeling India will definitely want to join that, right? A G7 plus India, if you like. They may try to make it a G7 plus 3 that they've had also, with a few, they've had a few rounds of those. But I think you might just end up seeing a G8, because the Western world now knows that if they continue with this racket of clubbing India together with Indonesia, Turkey, and South Korea as this block of global middle powers, and Brazil also, that
You're
just won't
done.
cut it. Okay. A global middle power does not land a probe close to the south pole of the moon, okay, and deploy rovers. That is not what a global middle power can achieve. A global middle power cannot also deploy SSBNs with intercontinental range submarine launched ballistic missiles on them. Of course, you will claim that are those ready? That's another discussion. Okay, but the point is that we are to continue to club India with these entities, as you know, some of those Western outlets like to do, is not going to cut it. The whole plan, if the whole plan is to help India balance China, certain things about China, especially on the geo-economic side, you cannot continue with this kind of rhetoric. India, being the most populous country in the world, with its very, very large military and a whole range of capabilities, cannot be called a global middle power. Okay, that itself
A
is
misnomer.
something very, yeah. That's a miscategorization if there ever was one. You know, it's a
So how do you
miscategorization.
see BRICS as a forum going forward? Of course, I want you to comment on this whole alternative currency that is being touted about. Is
I'll
there
come
a
to that.
reality of that?
I'll I'll come to that. See, BRICS, India will continue to use NDB and CRA. There's no question of that. India may even enhance the stature of the NDB if it suits India's own strategy. Right? That could also happen. So that will remain. Now, as far as the currency is concerned, like you said, there have been no real discussions. It's just a balloon being floated by, the certain outlets everywhere. And what do you mean by a common currency for the BRICS? Do you mean a common currency in terms of the euro, like the euro? Because you can forget about that. That means a monetary union between India, China, Brazil, South Africa, and six other countries and
Who
Russia.
would agree to it? Hmm.
That's absolute cloud cuckoo land nonsense. Okay, none of these gigantic entities whose entire geopolitics is about strategic autonomy and being able to do multilateral engagements in the world and getting out of the block mentality are going to gain by giving up their own monetary policy. Because when you accept a common currency, your central bank loses control over your own monetary policy, as has happened in the case of Greece, as has happened in the case of Portugal, as happened in the case of Ireland. The whole Eurozone crisis. Hello, please wake up. Who are these people talking about? That is, India is never going to give up the rupee, as simple as that. Okay. Okay. Now, option B. So, and another thing, to become a monetary union, you need to meet a whole lot of criteria, economic criteria, in terms of openness, in terms of fiscal policy, in terms of other things. This was not met even in Europe, which is why
Yeah.
the euro is also a problem, is fraught with problems, which is why target 2 balances have built up, where where Greece owes such a huge amount of money to Germany, and Germany runs a consistent export surplus vis-a-vis Greece. So you get the picture. So that's not going to happen. I'll do an entire. If your viewers are so inclined, I will do an entire 30 minutes on why a common currency
Let's.
is not a good idea
I'd
at all.
I'd love to do that, sir, because the narrative
Okay,
within this country is just coming out to be that by we will surrender our currency. And why in God's name would you want to go with an economic coordination with China? It's beside me.
Anybody who is suggesting this should be asked why they are doing it. Okay, the why is very important for that. The second part of the thing is, okay, suppose it's not a common currency that they are really talking about, in the sense of being just the only legal tender in all these territories. They are talking about something like a BRICS SDR. Whenever there is instability in the global macroeconomy, people propose that let's make the SDR the de jure reserve currency of the world. Central banks will hold most of their reserves in special drawing rights. Okay,
Yeah.
an SDR derived currency overseen by the IMF. Now, if they are suggesting let us do another BRICS type SDR thing backed by gold reserves and hold that, that means nothing. That can at best just be another asset class in which we can invest. It will not mitigate the problem of global spillovers.
Yes.
Okay, you need something that can be a proper unit of exchange. You need something that can be a unit of account. You need something that can be a proper medium of exchange. You need something that can be a store of value. this BRICS SDR type formulation will not meet any of those criteria per se. Not even they will say no. It might meet the most important criteria, which is of being able to hold asset value. I would argue not even that. It might not even be able to serve that purpose. Forget about the other purposes. They would say, oh no, let's use this currency to settle accounts
use, use your
between
local
India and
currencies.
Russia. Let's settle accounts between India and Russia by using this. Why? How will that help anyway? If you're not able to, Russia is not able to use the BRICS SDR anywhere else, okay, except maybe in China and to an extent in Brazil and South Africa, or for very small purposes, what will be the point?
Yeah, yeah,
See, this
yeah.
is another move to make the yuan the de facto BRICS currency, just like RCEP
Exactly,
was. Okay,
exactly. Why?
I'm
Why the
sorry.
only country pushing for a common currency is China?
When the PLA is deployed on the Indo-Tibetan border and has already been responsible for for the deaths of 20 of our soldiers,
Yes.
is the main supporter of a country which continues to say carry on a low intensity conflict with us in the Kashmir Valley, blocks us from all multilateral fora where we should definitely be, of which we should definitely be a part. There are people over here who are advocating the de facto embrace of that country's currency. What is wrong
Why?
with these people? People should ask them why. These people need to be questioned. Why they are advocating
Yeah.
such a lunatic path? They should be questioned, in my view. And who
I
are these
find
people?
I find the whole BRICS narrative to be so flawed, sir, because at the end of it, you're supporting a Chinese narrative. You are in BRICS to ensure that, as you said, to be the change from within. I mean, why would you want to be outside BRICS with these guys conspiring against you? Rather be inside and control what you can.
We have a proper architecture emerging in India now. Okay,
Gee,
we are part of BRICS, we are part of SCO, we are part of various global South fora, right? So the West knows that we can turn non-aligned any moment. Okay, and yet we are the people with a large diasporic presence in all of these Western countries, and not diaspora, who are scrambling for odd jobs or something, but diaspora who are entrenched in their economic structure. Of course, again, let me be very clear. I have the utmost respect for the people from various parts of the global South, right, who are working the difficult jobs in the Western Hemisphere. They are the ones who keep the Western economy moving. So I mean no disrespect to them. I have all the respect in my world in the world for them. But I would say this, that the point I'm trying to make is that India's global web has panned out in the right way. By being inside BRICS, by being inside SCO, we have a card. At the same time, but we should not end up leaning over or bending over, because China, no matter how much it tries, can throw us out of either BRICS or SCO. Right? It can't.
they put out these articles saying that they will try and do that and this and that.
But they
Oh, I think
cannot.
yeah, they can't. They can't. It just I just
Because you
lost you there
see,
for a
the
minute.
others will just leave and go away then. And the first people, ah,
India is the only reason why that BRICS thing is still standing. Who would want
so
to, in their
look,
right mind, associate with a Chinese-led world order?
honestly, I'll tell you, Adi, if I were to sum it up in a nutshell, if the Chinese cannot hurt us with some kind of two-front war or some kind of major action along the line of actual control, they don't have very many cards left to play. Their only other card would be to breed instability in India's northeast and other places. Finance people to make strange statements on all sides of the political spectrum. These are the kind of vectors they will attempt. But then these have been tried on India since independence by
Yeah.
entities which were relatively more powerful than them, right? So it's not. Of course, you may argue that social media was not there. Then doesn't matter. The generation which is going to come after us, Adi is going to say, is going to use a certain word to describe social media. That generation, you must have already noticed, again, I'm digressing, and this is a purely anecdotal and not a very empirical point by me.
No,
But
very
you must
interesting
have
actually.
noticed that those who are 10 years old or 15 years old younger than we are, I'm assuming we are in our 40s, of course, like those in their 20s and stuff like that, they just don't like talking on the phone, right? They don't like talking on the phone. You cannot really call them. They text mostly. And even in the case of text, they are becoming more and more sort of frugal with their texting, right? A time will come when social media would just be uncle territory. Nobody will care about it at all. That has already happened for certain social media platforms, but it's going to happen to all of them perhaps in the next 10, 12 years. And strangely enough, word of mouth will become ever so more important. Of course, this is a major prognostication being made by me. Again, it's purely based on anecdotal references
You're
and
saying it's cyclic.
observation.
You're saying it's
Yeah,
cyclic
yeah. Well, to an extent,
to an
people
extent.
get
Yeah.
tired with things. Things keep coming back, and things keep going away, and then coming back again. So it is cyclic. But my point is very simple. So what I'm saying is that the ability to fiddle around with societies as much as they think they can, which is also not something that is a given. You have to get a lot of things have to fall into place before you can create random trouble. Which is why I would say one thing though, the move, all the electioneering is okay. The move should be towards harmony in India. Greater our harmony, the more powerful we will become on the world stage. In that sense, I think Manmohan Singh made that say a similar kind of statement, and I will not disagree with him over here. Although I disagree with many of the things he did, especially on the economic side.
Yeah, from
But
1968, I would say.
the main thing I would disagree with him is his unnecessary pursuit of all these FTAs.
Yeah,
This ASEAN FTA and others. They didn't work out. And okay, even if you say that FTAs per se may not have been the wrong way to go, the way they were negotiated was very flawed, extremely
terrible.
flawed. The
We are
bilateral
renegotiating
invest
ASEAN now. Yeah,
the bilateral investment treaties that were put in place were also extremely flawed. The template itself was flawed, which
yeah,
is why those
yeah.
also have to be renegotiated, right?
So
Because see,
I'd ask
Manmohan
you.
Singh could not prevent the deindustrialization of India in those 3 years or 4 years after the GFC, between 2008 and 2012. Instead, what happened was real estate was allowed to run amok. And that is what ended up putting India in the fragile five in 2015.
Yes, I want to ask you one more question, sir, before we get into the audience questions, which are a lot. Trust you guys. Guys, you need to like this video, okay? And if you guys need, Mr. Saurav to be back more often on Dev Talks for these fantastic sessions, I must say, this is one of the best narratives, best explanations of finding out what's happening around us that I've heard in a long time now. Because what we've been hearing around is rhetoric. Rhetoric is fine, it's good to sell, but facts on the ground are totally different. So I want to get into that. I want to ask you about the G20 and its impact on the global world order. One of the things that actually came out in this is that our position in the world was strengthened up quite a bit with the factor that you had the global south kind of standing with you. I'm not going to say behind you because that's a very wrong way of putting it. They were standing with you, and you made sure that they were with you, their voice was brought out, and the way that the African Union was handled showed a certain level of understanding from a rising power like India towards the powers that could rise one time in the future, because we showed them that, listen, we were you at some time ago, we've come up from your position, so we understand where you are. What kind of a message did that send across with regards to the shift in the global power centers? And I refuse to call ourselves a power center or a third pole or a block, but what shift do you see as far as India's position in the world is concerned?
Adi, I'm glad you said that you refuse to see India as a power center or a block,
No, I don't want to be.
or a pole, because that is India's message actually.
Yep.
Somebody will say, oh, China is able to invest billions, it is able to bribe certain entities here and there. It doesn't matter. What India is able to share with the African Union, with the members of the African Union will actually help their countries grow. The India stack, which has been developed in the last 9 years properly, although Aadhaar is before that, but the rest of the India stack which has been developed, that India stack is a brilliant thing to share with the world. It will unlock efficiencies in various so-called developing economies, and that will pave the path to growth. The kind of things India can share with those countries is what they really need. We can share with them our developmental experience. We can share with them our vaccines, because we are the largest producer of vaccines in the world, and we are not just sitting on the vaccines we developed in the past. New ones are also being developed, right? We can share with them the India stack, which is open source and can be used by them, and that is increasingly we will be able to share with them very advanced weaponry, which will not come with any of the strings that they come with from other sources.
Oops,
They'll
sorry.
be able to they will be able to withstand any kind of imperial pressure, whether from east or west, much better. Then we have our businessmen in these countries. So there is something that I always say: there is a karma of real politics. There is a whole bunch of people. There are a whole bunch of people who say, "Oh, this is real politics. We should also aspire to be a great power. This, that, and we should also do the. We should not do any form of technology denial with Africa."
Yeah.
Okay, you must have seen on the sidelines of the G20, it was announced that we've entered into a $1 billion agreement with Nigeria, which will make their military industrial complex about 40% self-sufficient in terms of indigenous content. They
Yeah.
mean a few systems, obviously, not their entire. That has an element of, that may breed some confusion, but they are referring to certain systems, of which 40% by content will essentially be, by value, will be essentially indigenous in nature for those. But there are certain platforms which have been discussed with them. Obviously, I'm sure they'll be reported as well. But the point is that that is the way to go. Just like we have sought license production from XYZ in the last 75 years, now we are in a position to help others license produce things. But our term should be better. We should not try to enter into what is called a principal agent scenario. We should not try to become their sort of, may turn them into client states and keep
Hmm.
milking them forever. Now somebody would say, but this is very strange. Why won't you do that? Isn't that the way this business is conducted? I would argue no. Whatever you will gain by doing that will ultimately be offset by the kind of bad karma you will accrue. And by karma here I mean something very specific. Okay, I will not go into that. The today what people think matters. Say there is there is a country X in some part of the world. The Chinese, the dictator, or the even the elected head of that country has come to power using Chinese money, and the Chinese are trying to further burnish that person's position by getting the person to agree to various kinds of large projects.
That's
we
terrible.
Yeah, and those large projects, what can they do? One, they could be in a part of the country where this person hails from, so his
Hmm.
own constituency will get consolidated. And the second thing they can do is, initially it may seem like something big is happening in the country. A huge port is being made that would have never been made otherwise. It's another matter whether that port can at all be used or not. Okay. So this is and of course the Western media will also headline this. This port has been built in so and so country with Chinese money. But sooner than later, when the macroeconomic implications of this alliance or pact that that country's leadership has made with China becomes evident even to the man on the street, that is the day Sri Lanka happens. You get the picture?
Now.
Where Whereas India is never going to push any country, whether in the African Union or in the Latin American countries forum or in Southeast Asia, into such a scenario, in such poorly designed scenarios. India's India's what do you call that? India's engagement with them will be much more organic in nature, and
And
India
productive.
should
Yeah. Hmm.
and yeah, India should share those things which will actually work over there, not things which will make them indebted. This is what, by the way, BRI is not very different from what the Soviet Union ended up doing. Soviet Union used to give $4.5 billion to Cuba every year to keep
In
that
Africa,
economic. Ah, in that is
they
in
did
the
the same
80s.
thing in Africa. Yeah.
Yeah, and at least to be fair to the Soviet Union, they actually armed these countries with weapons that could be maintained in those countries and could be used for to fight imperial aggression. You know, and they also help them with pharmaceuticals and things like that. Whereas the Chinese, what they're doing is they're rebadging their own pharmaceuticals and saying it's made in India and then sending it on a ship to some part of Africa to give us a bad name. Ah. Of course,
I-
again, let me be very clear. We have to tighten our standards and we have
yeah.
to ensure that the kind of tragedies that have taken place in the recent past must not take place. We must not allow such tragedies to happen due to, the unscrupulous sort of elements which are there in the pharmaceutical sector in India. So let us be very clear about that. But having said that, it is also the truth that the Chinese have been rebadging medicines and sending it to Africa, right?
Our
So
medicines.
our medicine. So
They
we
do
have to
that.
be,
They do that within their country as well. By the way,
yeah,
they
yeah.
import it in Hong Kong. They repackage it and send it out.
Don't forget what happened recently when they had this final wave after the
Huh?
reopening.
Yeah.
What did they do? They imported Indian pharmaceuticals in bulk, then repackaged them with Chinese names and sold them in their via their retail stores. So they have been doing quite a bit of this anyway. My point is that we should not emulate imperial policies in any way. India, the reason why you saw Prime Minister Modi being hugged like that by the African Union chief is because they know that India is not an imperial entity. Okay. India's real politic, even if it were to be called real politic only, should be different. Real politic need not have only one shade called imperialism. That is not the one shade of real politic, right? Because all the others ended up doing the same thing. Soviet imperialism, PRC is, of course, wants to be the kingdom under heaven or something of that sort, and so on and
Mandate
so
from
forth.
heaven.
West is, of course, was born out of imperialism anyway, what we call the West. So, see, it is true that when China went into Africa, those countries did get a breather because before that it was IMF, World Bank loan conditionalities that were
Hmm.
ruining them. So I will not take away all credit from the Chicoms in this matter. I'll give them a little bit of credit, although only a little bit of credit is due because they did not have any altruistic motives for investing in Africa. But they did serve as an alternative to that confessions of an economic hitman kind of scenario. You read that book? Okay,
Yeah,
that book
it
details
connects right
go.
now. I didn't actually think of it. Yeah, it does connect.
Yeah, chapter after chapter of that book goes into how this person used to do aid tying and loan tying in various parts of the so-called third world or the developing world, for a certain multilateral organization. Anyway, so the thing is that we are they know that India has somebody, there are these commentators who also write, what soft power does India have? India doesn't have any soft power. Not true. India's hard power and soft power are very well fused with each other in the
Yeah.
African Union and other places. Once, when I was returning from a trip abroad, okay, at one of the stopovers, the seat next to me was empty, and a man came and sat down. He was returning from the Democratic Republic of Congo. Okay, you can imagine he was one of our peacekeepers over there, and I
Hmm.
had a very interesting discussion with him. Of course, there's no point in going into details, but the point is that the kind of things he said were clear that we are still seen as a stabilizing force. And he had no reason to lie because he was seeing things from the ground up. He would not unnecessarily tell somebody something that is not, uh, what may not be the ground reality. But I've had other discussions also with people from various African countries, and it seems the same thing that they consider India to be a different kind of sort of power or force than what these other countries are like, and
I think
that we
that
should
was,
never.
yeah, that will be very evident. That was very evident in the BRI conference with 90 countries that took part, and only about 40, 50 actually signed up. And the current conference which is going to happen, I'm sure, let's see how many countries actually come there.
Yeah, well,
And
Italy is not going to come anymore.
and the best thing is that when we called the Global South Summit, 125 countries landed up there. So that tells
Adi,
you.
I'm telling you, we just need to put our heads down, maintain social harmony inside India, and grow at a rate of even 7% real GDP growth rate annually for 30 years, and the world will be transformed. That is all India has to do. It doesn't have to do anything miraculous. Of course, somebody may claim that whether it's 7% growth now, doable or not for 30 years. I think it is doable because there are certain forces which have been unleashed, which are increasing our growth potential.
Yeah,
And one of those forces is digitalization, by the way.
yeah,
The other force is the creation of much needed physical infrastructure. Third force will, of course, be social infrastructure, in which we need to now give a lot of time.
yeah,
Education, healthcare.
yeah.
We need to now increase our spending on that. So those are there, and of course R&D spending also. The usual roster, but what is called the Salter cycle, which I had tweeted about. Again, I can discuss this, where prices fall, demand rises, greater scale is achieved, prices fall further. That kind of a cycle, I can see signs of that cycle, especially on the data side in India. So that will be a cycle of growth that will propel India forward. India just has to keep its marbles together. That is
That's
the main thing.
most important. Most importantly, most importantly.
And keep investing. The investments you're making in the military should not be staccato investments. Oh, something turns up, let us make an investment. But for 10 years, we will, go on and on about something. That's not how. There should be
Yeah.
regular investments according to those long-term integrated plans, etc., etc. So again, this is something you discuss a fair bit with people who were in the military. So we'll not go into this either.
No, no, not at all. Not at all. Not at all. So trust me, this has been a fantastic session, and I'm going to force you out that you need to come on to the channel at least once in 15, 20 days, so that we can talk about the real politic of economics. Because see, economics is something which is not understood by the common man. When you start about with these indexes and this and that, guy like me, I've not studied economics. It'll just go off my head. But the way you've kind of explained it, this tells a common man that, listen, there's a lot of realism that you need to kind of interpret the current situation with. You can't go with this hula baloo of potentiality. This whole potentiality ki bhai aisa ho jayega, ye ho jayega, wo ho jayega. See, the world that went by of our erstwhile country, you know uh, I wish it returns back. Fair enough. I mean, let me put that across very clearly. But the world is moved on. Like today, some people say that Bharatvarsh will come back with all the Chakravarti countries that were there with us and this and that. I'd like to caution these people, please don't speak that in the international arena, because they'll construe you in the same light as the Chinese. Because they'll say, yeah, the Chinese ask for your historical this thing and they're bloody aggressive. By 2028, 2030, when you come to a point of time when you'll be called a global power, the entire world of narrative which is against China will be touted against you. So you need to be very careful when you put out an external narrative. I think I agree with you very, very succinctly in this particular thing.
देखिए, लेट मी से दिस इन हिंदी, गंगा तो उल्टी नहीं बहेगी ना. हाँ. गंगा एक ही तरफ बहती है. और वो जो 2000 पुराना साल का भी जो देश है, that obviously had problems, otherwise it would not have fallen prey to foreign invasions. The Gupta Empire, it's like this, okay? Maurya Empire lasted 200, 300 years. Gupta Empire lasted 200, 300 years. Vijayanagar lasted 200, 300 years. Okay. What do we want to make? We want to make a country that will last 2000 years, not 200
Yes.
years. Okay.
Yes.
This is a country that will truly shape the world, which will change the world beyond recognition. Not a great country which rises to great power and then starts, faltering after 120 years or so.
Yeah.
We don't
Yeah.
want that. We don't want that at all. Because see, ultimately, what do we want? We want one world also, right? If you are
Yeah.
saying Vasudeva Kutumbakam, Vasudeva Kutumbakam, then we mean one world is one family, which means all are our brothers and sisters. But to be that chariot, to turn India into that chariot, or Bharatvarsh into that chariot, which can do that, which can bring the world together, we need a much longer strategy. And we need a stable way of growing, a stable way of doing things. The world has still not found out, by the way, a sustainable way of growth. The world has still not, forget about sustainable growth. The world still doesn't know how to sustain growth itself for any length of time. It doesn't have an economic framework which can create a steady state economy where there is no growth. Now, all these questions are unanswered. These are the questions that India needs to answer while making sure that its people are protected and are well defended. And for that, you have the Indian military supported by various scientific entities in India, right? So that, and of course, by Indian industry itself. So that has to go forward. You have to create a military industrial complex, because you don't want this game to get destroyed by somebody who uses a military vector. When economic competitiveness starts failing, people turn to the military vector. This has been the history of the world. Okay, always, if they can, or they end up being colonized themselves. Either of those. So it's not very surprising that the Chicoms are trying to flex their muscles here and there while they think they can, because their economy is quite, moribund. They are where Japan was in 1987 at a much lower level of per capita income. Their economy has not rebalanced. At least Japan's economy rebalanced, because Japan used to pay the farmers whose land was taken for industrialization properly. They used to be compensated properly. Whereas in the case of China, that never happened, which is why consumption is what it is in China. Dual circulation will not happen in China. The only thing that can happen in China is a dual convulsion. Ah, of course,
Chalo,
I'm
let's
not
get
going to laugh, because such a convulsion will mean
yeah,
a
it'll be
tragedy
terrible.
for the people of China.
People.
So I
Yeah,
cannot laugh about this
I
really.
mean, I
But
covered this last. I covered this last night. What do people think about the leaders in China? And one of the things which is my favorite joke that they mention is about Xi Jinping, who says he's an emperor in reverse. Forget anything else. भाई ये वापस जा रहा है, इसको रोको. They talk about this, and it's not funny. The Weibo trends that are coming out from there, you wonder, why, yeah, what is this? But anyways, let's get into your questions. There are loads of questions here, so we'll just run through the questions, short, crisp answers, if you don't mind,
yeah,
so that we can take as many as possible. You wanted to say something before I start up?
yeah, that's what I wanted to say. Let's take about at most about 5 or 6 questions,
Sure.
because
All
we
right.
have to run a
I'll
little bit.
pick
Yeah,
out the best ones. Also, guys, please like this video. There are almost close to about 800 people watching us. Like this video, yeah, so that it reaches maximum amount of people. Let's have realistic discussions about economics and geopolitics, and that's what Dev Talks has been trying to do as a narrative for this country for a while. Glad that you guys support this particular initiative. So please do that even further by liking and spreading the message to your friends. You can contribute towards my effort with the QR code that is up there, or become a member, or send us a super sticker or super chat. Let's get into the first one. Raghunandan, he says, ask sir, with the use of dollar, which is becoming lower, and the Fed lowering the dollar value, what will happen to the public debt and individual debt? Your view on it?
see, it's not like that. What When you look at public debt dynamics, what do you look at? You see, your public debt will not grow as a percentage of GDP as long as the interest rate on that public debt is less than the growth rate. Okay, the rate of interest is less than the real growth rate, because if GDP is in the denominator and public debt is in the numerator, okay, public debt going by R, GDP growing by G. Obviously, if R is less than G, then this fraction will come down, reduce
There
in
you go.
value. As simple as that. That is what they look at. There is a whole equation for debt dynamics. I don't have it ready with me. I can put it up on the screen maybe when we discuss just a pure session on economics or something. So the thing is that America's short burst of inflation has actually helped its debt dynamics. Okay, because its nominal GDP has grown quite rapidly in the recent past. And what will happen to individual debt? Individual debt is borne by individuals. Obviously, individual, unlike a government which can get a central bank to back it and borrows in its own currency. Individuals borrow in a currency that is mandated by the government. Your
Yeah.
borrowings are in a currency that your government makes you pay taxes in. That is what an individual borrows money in. So in America, the labor market continues to be a little tight. So individuals are being able to get jobs, but whether they'll be able to bargain enough for wages, that is another thing altogether. I don't see what is called a wage price spiral happening in America. In fact, inflation will cool off in America within the next 2-3 years, pretty much. It's already sputtering, beginning to sputter here and there. It'll cool off because the world economy won't be able to take it, and the reordering of supply chains will gather pace. So both from the supply and demand side, you're going to see deflationary forces come into play in large parts of the world, and that will have a impact on the interest rate as well. And that is when the United States of America may again have to resume its cheap money policies, because this whole cycle of raising interest rates by the Fed has been raising interest rates to fight inflation, right? Will start reversing, and you will slowly but surely, not slowly, you would quite at a fair clip, you would return to the world of 2015-16 again. That is where you will be. But with China this time finding it more and more difficult to actually keep its economy on an even keel.
Priyanka ji asks, with more and more bilateral trade in domestic currency, how will USA survive in the debt ceiling policy? Vande Matram.
Well, not a problem. See, debt, USA borrows about 30% from abroad. 30% of public debt of the United States is held abroad. The 70% is held onshore, right? So it's not something that they cannot manage. People forget all this when they talk about and another thing about the dollar. Bilateral trade can happen in the dollar, but the dollar remain in non-dollar denominated bilateral trade can happen. Although the last time I shared figures with Aadi, it clearly showed that the dollar has not lost its
It's
position.
actually gained 2%.
Yeah, either in the currency finance market or in the settlements market. Okay, and it has definitely not lost its position where it really matters,
Yeah.
in global reserves. And these other two things are not happening in in different currencies enough for people to start reducing dollar reserves. People will have to trade a lot more in other currencies before the central banks of various countries start holding non-dollar currencies in their reserves to a much greater extent. See, why will a central bank hold a currency in its reserves? Mainly for stabilization purposes.
Yeah.
Okay. Suppose your people are importing a lot from in the yuan. It makes sense for the central bank to hold yuan. If a lot of your people start borrowing in the yuan, it again makes sense for your central bank to hold yuan. If your country is exporting a lot to China and gaining and earning in yuan, then also it'll help if the central bank holds yuan, because then the central bank will be able to intervene to keep your currency somewhat weaker than the yuan, because you are seeing that as a major export market. Get the picture? This is what has happened with the dollar over time. Not to mention that most of the commodities are denominated in dollars. That is a huge incentive also to hold dollars in reserves for central banks of various countries, because oil, after all, is the major import for most of the countries of the world, except the OPEC nations, obviously. So there is your thing. So it's not like the dollar is declining. This is a myth which is being created. There is no challenger to the dollar. The euro is not a challenger to the dollar. The yuan is definitely not a challenger to the dollar. The TINA factor continues to hold for the dollar. And America will definitely is America's debt dynamics are not unstable. They are unstable only if you take into account something called unfunded liabilities, which goes into some 200 trillion plus. But that's over a very long horizon, over 30-40 years. That's a separate discussion altogether. But in the near term, the debt dynamics are not unstable.
One of the biggest clues is that for to switch on the grain deal, the Russian says, please switch us back into the SWIFT. If the
Yeah,
dollar is done, why does he want to switch back? Because his market is still the West. I mean, they're
yeah.
fighting a war, they've got a disagreement, but in the long term, he's they're going to sit together and again.
The Russians did not want to get out of anything. Okay, the Americans kept, for lack of a better term, screwing them using Swift
And
every
that
now
too,
and
I
then.
think the target was more Europe than Russia.
Yeah, and
Because
then in the middle, they actually increased the Bank of Russia's standing in SWIFT in the middle. They
yeah,
even did that, by the way,
why
when
would
the
you do
so-called
that?
reset was going on.
Huh. Why would you
See,
do that if
America, there are two, three different camps over there, as is the case in most places now. One, of course, wants immediate victory over Russia, which will never happen. Another may want a delayed victory over Russia. Another thinks that no, Russia, we should not. The vacuum left by Russia will end up be filled by something else altogether. So they are
yeah.
not in favor of any victory probably. So that is the thing over there.
Nikhil, thank you so much for joining the channel. Gumnami Babaji, thank you so much for your contribution. Jhaji, how do you see the currency valuations in this multipolar world order? Who's the boss? What would be the criteria to judge the wealth of a nation?
See, economics has all these criteria. When you talk about, you'll often see a what do you call that, a newspaper item saying that, oh, this is the rupee is undervalued at the moment, because if you go by the effective exchange rate, the rupee should be at least 10% higher in value. But that's theory. But the reality is that currency valuations are increasingly decided by global flows. Global financial flows decide currency valuations more than anything else. Now, question is, who would be now? You may have read an article which came out in the Financial Times by one of those uh, sort of Indian origin noted economists in some Ivy League place. I won't name the person, who says that the only way forward for India is to devalue the rupee, the INR. Okay, unfortunately, that is not correct. It's not so simple. It doesn't mean that you devalue the rupee and your market stays or you capture a new market. First of all, in the short term, it may not matter at all, because your invoices are completely denominated in the dollar. So your
Hmm.
devaluing the rupee does not help you immediately, right? It can help you over time, obviously, as that builds into your cost structure. But at the other end, because you also import a lot of things to make something, that also will then get reflected in your cost structure if you devalue your currency.
Yeah, yeah.
Developing countries will continue to be subject to what is called the financial channel of the exchange rate. When you talk about a devaluation or a depreciation for a developing country's currency, people say, oh, my exports get cheaper. No, your exports, it's not just that your exports get cheaper. It could be that liquidity starts drying up in your banking system, because many of your people would have borrowed abroad, and those start getting withdrawn as your currency depreciates.
Hmm.
It becomes more and more difficult for the people who borrowed abroad and who are earning in rupees but have borrowed abroad to repay their loans,
Yep.
right? This will have an impact on the real side of things in terms of aggregate demand, because companies will not invest, because they will be hard put. So private investment will go down if you just devalue your currency willy-nilly like that in search of some export nirvana, which will not happen so easily. And
The
export
Chinese tried.
nirvana doesn't happen just like that. So it
Chinese
is,
tried it. Huh? They devalued their currency by 14%. It didn't work.
but it's not
Their
working,
exports
is it?
dropped.
And I told you this is the last time over as well. It's
Yep.
not so simple. It's not so simple. Just like it's not so simple either that you do increase government expenditure and your GDP will keep going up. It won't happen, right? The peak multiplier of that might be very small. What kind of investment you do, what kind of other things go along with it, all that will matter.
Gee.
That is, so there are many nitty gritties over here that have to be looked at. So for the foreseeable future, the boss, whether you like it or not, will continue to be the Federal Reserve of the United States of America with the dollar. There is no alternative to that. We are talking about a 10 to 12-year horizon. We are much better shielded now, and the more we trade with America, like we are already at 180 billion plus, right?
Yeah.
We are talking about 300 billion by 2027. I would say it will be more than that, because the Indian worker is what America needs. You are going to see us start holding close to 400, 500 billion US dollars with a total forex reserves of maybe 1 trillion plus. Okay, you will see. Right now we hold around 220 billion of our 600 billion or so in dollars, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah,
We have other
30%.
gold holdings and other things as well, obviously, or maybe a little more. But are we going to hold much more in the future? Because that is what the G20 was about. The G20 was about the geo-economic alliance between India and the United States that is being forged at the moment. It is not a military alliance. It will never be a military alliance. It is not a strategic alliance in the sense of, fighting a war here and there. It is a strategic alliance in terms of geo-economics.
Yeah.
And it is an inevitable alliance. And this coupling will go on for the next 15 years. So that is where we are headed.
Last couple, sir. Aditya says, what can we do more that BRICS can be an advantageous thing for us by apart from pushing INR as well as balancing the G7? As you say, we need to hedge our bets. Yeah, that's what I say quite often.
Yeah, we will continue to hedge our bets. So with BRICS, we should direct new development bank investments in the way we want. We should agree to increase the capital of the new development bank, but proportionally, by the way. With these new members coming in, I'm sure that will happen. The,
Yeah,
the vote share should not change. We should not allow our vote share to get unnecessarily diluted, right? We should be very clear about those negotiations, and we should direct it. We should say NDB will invest in IMEC. Okay. Of course, we are not allowing NDB to invest in BRI, by the way, in BRI projects. The Chinese will have something to say about that, maybe. But we have to use NDB properly. We have to make the CRA stronger. All the things that we need to hedge against global spillovers and to have our own architecture, our own multilateral architecture. It sounds very funny, own multilateral. That sounds like an oxymoronic
it's an
statement.
oxymoron.
But
Yeah,
yeah, but the kind of we need to have these, let's say, sympathetic multilateral structures in place. And the more we do with BRICS, because see, our capacities are also growing. Earlier, putting up $5 billion was a great matter of discussion.
today it's
Today, it
not.
might not be the same anymore. So we have been increasing our support to various multilateral entities, and we shall keep doing that. We will stay invested in BRICS, but all these strange balloons of BRICS currency and this and that, we don't need that. We don't need a BRICS currency. That doesn't suit us. We don't need that stabilization. We can deal with in bilateral currencies also to an extent, especially with the UAE and Saudi Arabia, because they can invest in India. So even if rupees accrue in their accounts, they can push that back into India. That is what we are telling them to do anyway. They can buy more from India. In India, you have to invest in rupees only, na? And when you buy Indian things, you have to basically pay in rupees at some point. Okay. So instead of paying in dollars and having that converted to rupees, and then with the transaction being settled, all the rupees you have accrued in your various rupee accounts, you use that to settle transactions. We should
That's
not get into this BRICS currency
that's what
scenario at all.
that's
Ah.
what Russia is being told. You allow us to invest in your country, and now they've opened up those oil fields and all that stuff that they want us to
No,
invest into. So
you invest in our country. They are the ones sitting with the maximum rupees. So you come and invest in India. They have been
either
given, by the way, for all people are missing something. For the Vande Bharat, the next round of Vande Bharat units being produced, 200, 120 was won by that TMH with
TMH.
RVNL. Yeah. Yeah, Russian company is going to be producing that along with RVNL.
I won't be surprised if the tin cans that are going to go across the Saudi Arabian desert will also be made by them. Get the Russians also involved in this. China will be sitting here. What is this? You know?
China has made a great play, but it was a flawed play from the very
Yeah.
beginning. Because
Yeah.
unfortunately, it was that old Soviet play only. It's not anything very innovative. We will give loans to third world countries and help them build things, infrastructure, this, that. This is not very different from what the Soviet Union tried to do here, there, and
Hmm.
everywhere. Who built Bhilai steel plant in India? Okay. Ah, And the Chinese did not even try to build that many steel plants elsewhere because their own overcapacity is so much.
So
They can
high.
produce
Yeah.
1 billion tons of steel. They produce more than 1 billion tons. We are at 120 million tons plus, and we are second in the world. And we are looking to go to 300 million tons by 2030 or so.
Yeah,
Okay.
they just went nuts.
Yeah.
Uh,
So there,
sec-
that is your state of affairs.
Second last one, Jagpreet ji says, Saurav, sir, we're not putting money into the RD. How can we bring government and private sector to invest into RD more? Research and development.
Okay, so the government has created something called the National Research is going to create on the lines of the National Science Foundation. But unfortunately, the government share in that is on the lower side. I think the government needs to up its share majorly. There have been many studies which have observed a crowding in effect in research and development investment. It has been found that areas where the public sector invests in R&D ends up drawing in private investment as well. Okay, so the key to this is the government has to increase R&D spending. How do we get them to do it? They have lot of labs have been built up in India in the public sector over the last 75 years, over the last 7 8 years also, by the way. But they are understaffed. Okay, and they don't have enough alliances with the private sector, with private industry. You start energizing them, help them recruit the people they need to recruit, and help them work closely with the private sector, and not just via a macro foundation like the National Research Foundation that you're creating. Even at the lab level, allow public private partnerships to happen. Even at the lab level, allow that to happen. Public private partnerships, micro level public private partnerships in R&D are required in India, apart from the apex level initiatives you are doing. And where do you get the money for all this? First of all, you invest. First of all, that is, you if you look at government procurement, just government procurement, okay, not capital spending by the government, but there are a lot of lacunae that can be taken out, and this should be a priority for the government. We are at around 0.7% of GDP, or 0.6%. 0.6 to 0.7% is where we are stuck, which is called GERD. Our gross expenditure on research and development. We need to increase that to first 1% as soon as possible, and then to 2% within a 10-15 year time frame. It is, when you talk about import substitution, export promotion, you're missing something. Both import substitution and export promotion will fail unless your economy innovates. Okay. The real fight is not between the import substitution strategy and the export promotion strategy. The real fight is on the innovation based industrial policy. I'll give you an example. Bangladesh has done export promotion, has gained a lot by textile exports all over the world, but now its economy has begun to falter. And that is because it has not invested in innovation. It has not been able to branch out into other industries. It is not even being able to climb the value chain. When you talk about textiles, हम लोग को ना एडवांस छोड़ के ना टेक्सटाइल्स करना चाहिए. अरे आज के जमाने में टेक्सटाइल भी बहुत एडवांस्ड है भाई. Go and see a state of the art textile mill and see the kind of technologies that go into it, the kind of automation, the control and instrumentation, the kind of materials R&D you require. If you want to capture value, even in the so-called lower end industries, which are actually not lower end anymore, you need innovation, you need R&D. Otherwise, you will not be able to capture any value. You will be at the bottom of the heap over there, and very soon your so-called competitiveness, if it is only a function of labor cost and position and geographic location, then it will go away, it will wither away. You need to innovate. And funnily enough, as in the India's Chandrayaan 3 demonstration has shown, and the fact that its defense exports are rising, and the fact that it is able to build its own nuclear design and build its own nuclear plants, means
Thorium,
that
yeah.
our competitive and comparative advantage actually lies in the higher end industries. Okay, we should be looking to capture 500 billion to 1 trillion in advanced manufacturing in the next 15 years. It's as simple as that. For one simple another, and the reason is very clear. Why do you think everybody is coming and making global capability centers in India? They used to make back offices. Now they are making their support R&D structure in India.
Yeah.
If you have the R&D structure already here, you get your act together to capture the advanced manufacturing side also. That is the future. There's a whole lot that can be done. And again, geopolitics will help us. The West
Yeah.
will not be able to source many materials from Russia, but we will be able to. So it
So
makes sense for them to come and locate themselves over here.
the same thing with Europe. And the last one, sir. Hi, Adi. Does trading in rupee looking? How does trading in rupee looking in the near and far future? Are we moving in the direction to, or are we replacing the yuan or RMB?
No, we can't replace the yuan in 5 years in central bank reserves or anything. That is not going to happen that quickly. In 10 years' time, we will replace them. The and our percentages will be greater. We will, like, they are around 2 to 3% of central bank reserves. The yuan is, that is, the yuan is 2 to 3% of central bank reserves. We'll be better than that, maybe in around 2034 or so. But we have to keep growing at a steady clip, and we have to make sure that everything is stable. Internal stability is the key. With the kind of population we have, with the kind of youth we have, with the kind of entrepreneurship which is being unleashed right now, and the government has to do more on that front, by the way. It has to really make ease of doing business should not be a euphemism in any way. Make it even easier to do business, and just see what the Indian population can do. you know the people, and then the government coffers will be stuffed with revenue. Make sure that the government directs that towards R&D and building our military industrial complex, and obviously the general spending on education and healthcare has to be increased. So a positive virtuous cycle lies ahead for India, provided it doesn't end up doing any more disruptions. No disruptions should be even, what should entertained, either from the government side or from society or anywhere. Our mantra should be: we will not disrupt our own country in any way. We need steady state, or steady growth for at least 15 years. This should be the key. Yeah. Then just see how the world sees India. Now is
Sir,
nothing. What you're seeing now is nothing.
the geopolitical change will be even more forefront and forthright, and actually will be more evident, evidently visible, if I may say. Though it's not going to be that only seen in a certain analysis or a certain article. You'll be able to actually feel the geopolitical shift which is taking place. Mr. Saurav, I must say this was a fantastic session, and I think a lot of the people have also said that you need to get him more often so that we can actually talk this kind of realistic geopolitical economics and economical geopolitics, if I may twist the term in my for my own benefit. But I must say that a session on economics does help us understand where we are headed as a country, and what is it that we are looking for in the future, and what should we look at as a realistic sort of a picture for ourselves in terms of geopolitics going forward, and figuring out where does India stand in the world. So thank you so much for bringing that out. It's a pleasure talking to you. Wonderful session, like a lot of people are saying. I hope to actually interact with you more often. Guys, before you sign off, like the video. Most importantly, I produce it. You guys have to market it by liking the video. So please, please, please do that. Thanks, sir, once again.
Thank you, Aadi, for having me. Right. Bye.
Jai Hind.
Jai Hind.